German intelligence officials are admitting that the drones flying over German military bases and key routes are in fact Russian. But is Russia ramping up its drone espionage program with bigger drones flown from even more dangerous locations? Plus, why? Why is Russia doing it? We're going to break it all down. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's do it. Slap that subscribe and let's crack into it. Now, this is coming from German officials admitting what, frankly, we at this channel have been talking about for a while, which is that German military bases have continued to be swarmed by drones generally believed to be associated with Russia. And now Germany and the United States are admitting it. Officials from both countries are saying that Russia or its proxies are flying surveillance drones over routes that the United States and its allies use to move military supplies through eastern Germany, right? Collecting intelligence that could be used to bolster the Kremlin's sabotage campaign or assist its troops in Ukraine. This is according to U.S. officials and other Western officials. And this, again, is part of this larger Russian sabotage campaign that includes fires at warehouses in Britain, attack on a dam in Norway, cutting cables under the Baltic Sea, and a whole host of operations. But recently, the Russian efforts have diminished considerably. And the New York Times speculates that it's because of improved diplomatic efforts to end the war. I just don't believe that. I think it's either because Russia has decided they're actually not all that effective, or more likely there's actually intelligence countermeasures taking place that are helping to stop this effort. Maybe by Europe. I don't think the United States is going out of its way. But as they say, the landscape is more difficult for Russians to operate these sabotage campaigns in Europe anyway, but it remains very easy for them to operate these drone overflights. Now, I think what I think is pretty wild here is, in fact, first off, these flights are concentrated in a German state called Thuringia, a German publication, and that while some German outlets are reporting that Germany's kind of building up an anti-drone system at some of its military bases, Germany admits that they are a considerable security risk. And again, if they can't shoot down the drones or stop the drones or force them to land or anything, they're a considerable security risk, but obviously not considerable enough for the Germany to actually do anything. And I actually think this is part of the problem here. Now, the publication reported that some of the drones were manufactured in Iran, and German intelligence officials believe that at least some of the flights may have originated from ships in the Baltic Sea, which is insane because if we're talking about sea-launched drones made in Iran, these are likely either Shahed drones or kind of Shahed variants. And we're talking about very long-range drones. These are more akin to combat aircraft than to the quadcopter short-range drones that we see typically flown on the Ukrainian front lines. And this alone is a huge escalation, right? We've talked about the fact that it's not really that much of a secret that foreign adversaries will buy commercial camera drones, for example, and fly them over sensitive U.S. military sites. In fact, just last year, we talked about a Chinese national who was a grad student, completed his graduate program, and was going to be returning to China as his visa expired. But before he left, he bought a Radio Shack drone, removed the altimeter and the GPS restrictions, and then flew it back and forth between a shipyard in Virginia, spying on the construction of U.S. nuclear submarines. Of course, he was arrested. He was given some sort of 6-month sentence and then deported back to China, where he was probably welcomed as a hero. And so, which was exactly what was going to happen to him anyway. And so I say this because it's one thing to say, hey, you're going to buy these commercial drones, you're going to conduct these kind of short range reconnaissance. It's a whole other animal to say, listen, we're taking these drones from Iran. We are launching them over military bases and all across your airspace. And essentially, right, nothing has happened. And essentially, they're facing no consequences, right? Literally, one of the experts they talked to, a U.S. official, said the drone flights over supply routes were, quote, straight up espionage, right? And that, I think, is the takeaway here is oftentimes when you have these, like, again, the Chinese example I gave, when the Chinese national was arrested, he said, oh, I'm just a hobbyist drone pilot. I just bought this Radio Shack drone and the drone got blown off course. I got lost and I was flying back and forth across that nuclear submarine under construction. I just didn't realize I wasn't supposed to do that. this is not the case, right? There's no way you're going to see an Iranian-made Shahed flying overhead and pretend like you're like, I'm just a hobbyist. I just like launching reconnaissance drones from my boat. It's just my hobby, right? There's no second explanation. It's just espionage. Okay. And again, Russia's trying to learn who's manufacturing the weapons for Ukraine, how the weapons are being shipped to Poland, and more important, it's also likely trying to get battlefield intelligence meant to give the Russian army a better idea of what weaponry it would face and when, right? There's also a case of sort of larger intelligence gathering where if you know what your adversary needs, then you have a sense of what their weaknesses are, right? You know their greatest needs. You can kind of triangulate where you are being most effective. I'm trying to think of an analogy here. It would be like if you know that your opponent in a baseball game is doing nothing but batting practice, you know that they are most worried about them having to, that your strength is your pitchers, right? I don't know a soccer analogy because I'm a red-blooded American. But again, as they also point out, Western officials acknowledge that if Russia wanted to step up its sabotage campaigns, it's going to be very useful given that they now know where these key shipments are being passed. And, I wanted, though, there's a deeper story. There's a deeper sort of message here. This is something that has been a pervasive Russian message throughout the West. And that is that your countries are impotent against Russian strength. That was one of the key victories that we talked about at Putin's meeting with Trump, right? You notice that Putin agreed to no conditions. He simply played Trump and his staff for fools, pretending like there were some concessions, and then of course, going home and saying we had conceded nothing. So all that he had happen was that he managed to show on a global stage that Russia and the United States are treating each other as peer countries. Russia isn't a pariah. Vladimir Putin isn't treated as a ghoulish murderer. He's treated as a fellow head of state on par with the United States, which, to be clear, the United States economy 10 to 20 times the size of Russia's. The U.S. military, vastly more effective than Russia's. And the Russian armed forces in Ukraine would, against particularly U.S. air power, last probably, I would say, no more than 60 days. But Putin's goal is to appear as a peer. And to appear as a peer, you have to do two things. You have to make yourself look bigger and badder. That's what he did at his summit with Trump. But you also have to make your adversaries appear weaker by comparison. And there is a huge flex and an important message being sent when you can launch your reconnaissance drones over someone else's sovereign territory. And not only are they impotent to stop you, but they can't even explicitly say it for fear of antagonizing you. This is a little bit like, remember in the Afghanistan war when the U.S. would fly Reaper drones into Pakistan, and Pakistan essentially just agreed to these terms because, well, the Pakistani military was heavily dependent on the United States for aid and assistance. And as a result, right, it became clear that the U.S. was a dominant player in the region, and Pakistan was, well, Pakistan. In this scenario, Russia is positioning itself like the United States. We fly where we want. We do what we want. No one tells us otherwise. And Germany and all of the EU by extension is Pakistan. But realistically, again, is that really the dynamic you think is true? Well, again, the proof is in the pudding. Germany can't shoot down these drones. They're too ineffective. They're too impotent. They're too bureaucratized. They're too full of red tape, right? They can't jam the drones. They can't force them to land. They can't take them over because they simply lack the effective tools. And, it's ultimately like Russia's not wrong. And that's the problem here, is that Germany may have a larger economy, and maybe in some future, the German military and German national security interests might enable them to actually push back on Russia. But it's a little bit like, you ever seen videos online of trained MMA fighters or trained jiu-jitsu fighters who take on big, strong bodybuilders? Well, the bodybuilders are like Germany in this scenario. They're big. Their economy is big. They have all the tools to be a dominant fighter, but they're unwilling to actually do the technical work, learn and execute the actual moves of winning a fight. In contrast, Russia has shown that they are absolutely willing to do even though they are smaller and less powerful per se, they are willing to do the moves, the movements of win a fight. And ultimately, as anyone who follows the UFC or anyone who's watched a jiu-jitsu match will tell you, it's not the bigger guy, it's the more technical guy. And if you can be big and technical, great. But if you're small and you're willing to do the moves, do the things that no one else is willing to do, you can dominate. And the question is, do you really want to live in a world where Vladimir Putin is the most militarily and strategically effective leader in Europe? Anyway, hit that subscribe. Of course, and if you want to support me and the channel, because I make some pretty controversial takes, you can support me and the team over on combatvetnews.com. Become a member. The link is in the description. Any one of these tiers gets you access to twice weekly combat footage that we do a deep dive analysis on. A lot of it is sent to us straight from units on the front line, but in fact, using gear that we have helped purchase them. So a huge thank you to, of course, all of our Colonel tier members, guys like I Just Guy Call, Chris Rossi, AL90, Sergey Zinchenko, D. Stewart, James Porsche, B. Hemmerling, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you guys. You guys are the OGs. Cheers.